Connor was 11 years old, which in Belgian Malinois years meant he'd earned every grey hair on his muzzle and every afternoon nap in the San Diego sunshine. He lay on the grass at Sunset Cliffs Park, his breathing steady and deep, watching the Pacific Ocean turn orange and purple as the sun descended toward the horizon. His handler, though that word didn't quite capture their relationship anymore, sat on a nearby bench, scrolling through his phone while keeping one eye on Connor the way he'd done for 9 years. Master Chief Petty Officer Jason Reeves had been a Navy SEAL for 16 years, and Connor had been his partner for the last 9 of them. Together, they'd deployed 6 times to Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Together, they'd survived firefights, IED blasts, and the kind of chaos that bonded humans and dogs in ways civilians couldn't fully understand. Now they were both retired. Connor medically, after a piece of shrapnel from a Kandahar ambush had ended his career at age 9, and Jason voluntarily, choosing to leave active duty rather than deploy without his partner. Some of Jason's teammates had thought he was crazy to retire early over a dog. Those teammates had never worked with military working dogs, never understood that the bond wasn't handler and tool, it was brothers in arms. "You getting soft in your old age, buddy?" Jason called to Connor, though his voice was gentle. The dog's tail thumped twice against the grass, without Connor bothering to lift his head. That was the understanding they'd reached in retirement. Connor didn't have to be alert and mission-ready every second anymore. He could just be a dog, enjoying the sun and the ocean breeze. Jason's phone buzzed, a text from his girlfriend Savannah asking if he wanted to grab dinner. He smiled and typed a response, then glanced at his watch. 6:15. They'd been at the park for 45 minutes, Connor's usual evening routine. Time to head home soon. The park was emptying as dusk approached. The families with young children had left. The joggers were finishing their final loops. A few couples remained, watching the sunset from the cliffs. Jason liked this time of day, the quiet, the transition from day to night, the peace that felt earned after years of violence and chaos. Connor suddenly raised his head, ears forward, focused on something Jason couldn't immediately identify. The dog's body language wasn't aggressive, not the coiled readiness of his working days, but alert, aware. Jason followed Connor's gaze and saw 3 men walking across the grass about 50 yards away. Young, maybe early 20s, wearing clothes that suggested they weren't here for the scenery. Baggy jeans, oversized hoodies despite the warm evening, baseball caps pulled low. They were loud, their laughter carrying across the open space in a way that felt performative, like they were trying to establish dominance over the environment. Jason's SEAL training kicked in automatically. Assess, categorize, monitor. Probably not an immediate threat, but definitely worth watching. He stood and called to Connor. "Come on, boy, let's head out." Connor stood slowly, his hind legs stiff from arthritis that no amount of medication could completely eliminate. He'd taken worse hits than aging. That shrapnel in Kandahar had also damaged his hip, but 9 years of hard use had left their mark. He walked toward Jason with the slight limp that was now permanent, and Jason felt the familiar pang of guilt that Connor had sacrificed his body in service. "You did good today," Jason said, clipping the leash to Connor's collar. More for show than necessity, since Connor never strayed far. "Nice long walk, good nap, that's the life, right?" Connor's tail wagged, and Jason could have sworn the dog was smiling. That was retirement, walks, naps, occasional visits from Jason's old teammates who wanted to pay respects to a legend, and the deep satisfaction of having earned the right to rest. They were halfway to the parking lot when Jason realized he'd left his water bottle on the bench. "Damn it," he muttered. "Stay here, buddy." He dropped Connor's leash. The dog knew the command "stay" better than most humans knew their own names, and jogged back to retrieve the bottle. It took maybe 30 seconds, but in those 30 seconds, the 3 men changed direction and approached the spot where Connor waited alone. Gavin Sawyer was 23 and had been out of prison for 6 weeks. Armed robbery with a weapon enhancement, he'd done 4 years of a 7-year sentence and gotten paroled for good behavior that was mostly fictional. He'd learned nothing except how to be angrier at a world that, in his mind, had never given him a fair chance. His companions, Adrian Ruiz and Nolan Ford, were cut from similar cloth. Small-time criminals with big-time resentments, the kind of guys who blamed everyone but themselves for their failures and looked for opportunities to feel powerful in a world where they felt powerless. "Yo, check out the dog," Adrian said, nodding toward Connor, "just sitting there like someone's going to come back for it." "Probably got abandoned," Nolan laughed. "Look at that thing. It's ancient. Owner probably figured it wasn't worth the vet bills and just left it." Gavin stared at Connor with something ugly stirring in his chest. He'd always hated dogs, had been bitten by a neighbor's pit bull when he was 12, and that fear had curdled into hatred over the years. But more than that, he hated anything that seemed content, peaceful, like it belonged somewhere when he didn't belong anywhere. "Let's fuck with it," Gavin said. "Man, it's just a dog," Adrian said, but without much conviction. He was used to going along with whatever Gavin suggested. That's how you survived in their circle. You followed the alpha, even when the alpha was leading you somewhere stupid. They approached Connor, who watched them with the calm awareness of a dog who'd faced actual threats and recognized these weren't it. His tail didn't wag, but he didn't growl either. He simply sat, waiting for Jason to return, the way he'd waited outside buildings in Ramadi while Jason cleared rooms, the way he'd waited by medevac helicopters in Kandahar while Jason coordinated extraction. "Hey, dog," Gavin said, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "You lost. Where's your owner?" Connor's ears flicked back slightly. Not aggression, just acknowledgement that he was being addressed. He remained sitting, calm, unthreatened. That calm is what set Gavin off. The dog's peace felt like judgment, like Connor could see right through him and found him wanting. Gavin's hand shot out and shoved Connor's shoulder, not hard enough to knock him over, but hard enough to make the older dog shift his weight. "Gavin, man, come on," Nolan said, nervous now. "Let's just go." But Gavin was committed now, his anger feeding on itself. He shoved Connor again, harder this time, and the dog's arthritis-weakened legs struggled to keep him upright. Connor still didn't growl, didn't snap, didn't show aggression. He'd been trained too well, had learned too deeply that humans were not threats to be attacked, but partners to be protected, even when those humans didn't deserve it. "Look at this pathetic thing," Gavin laughed, and the sound was ugly, devoid of real humor. He kicked Connor in the ribs, not full force, but hard enough to hurt, hard enough to make the old dog stumble and go down on his front legs. That's when Connor's training reasserted itself in a different way. He couldn't fight back, that had been trained out of him except in specific combat scenarios. But he could protect himself. He tucked his head down, covering his skull and throat, and tried to make himself smaller, enduring rather than engaging. Adrian, emboldened by Gavin's actions and the dog's lack of resistance, picked up a rock about the size of a baseball. "Bet I can hit it from here." "Do it," Gavin urged, his voice excited now, intoxicated by the power of causing pain without consequence. The rock hit Connor in the shoulder, and the old dog yelped, a sound of pain and confusion, the sound of an animal who'd served with honor being repaid with cruelty. He tried to stand, to move away, but his damaged hip made him slow, vulnerable. Nolan threw another rock, this one catching Connor in the hindquarters. The dog went down fully now, lying on his side, his breathing labored, his eyes showing pain and bewilderment. In all his years of service, in all the combat he'd seen, he'd never been attacked by the humans he'd been trained to trust and protect. "This is hilarious," Gavin said, kicking Connor again, this time in the stomach. "Stupid old dog can't even run away." They didn't see Jason running toward them from the parking lot, didn't hear his footsteps on the grass, didn't notice until it was far too late, Jason had been 20 yards away when he'd seen the first rock thrown. His mind had processed the scene in the fraction of a second his training allowed. 3 men, 1 vulnerable target, hostile action, immediate threat. Connor, his brother, his partner, his responsibility, being hurt while unable to defend himself. The rage that filled Jason was cold and precise, the kind of anger that didn't cloud judgment but sharpened it. He'd killed enemy combatants with less emotion than he felt watching these 3 cowards torture his dog. He covered the distance in seconds, moving with the speed and silence that 17 years of SEAL training had perfected. Gavin didn't know Jason was behind him until an arm wrapped around his throat from behind, not choking, not yet, but with the unmistakable pressure of someone who knew exactly how to control a human body. "Big mistake," Jason said quietly, directly into Gavin's ear. He drove his knee into the back of Gavin's leg, the precise spot to collapse the knee without permanent damage, and rode him down to the ground, maintaining control of his neck. Gavin tried to struggle, but Jason had subdued armed insurgents in close combat. A street thug was nothing. Adrian spun around, his hand reaching for something in his waistband. Jason's trained eye identified it as a knife, even as Adrian pulled it. Jason released Gavin, stepped inside Adrian's reach as the knife came out, and delivered a palm strike to Adrian's jaw that snapped his head back and sent him stumbling. Before Adrian could recover, Jason swept his legs and followed him down with an elbow strike to the solar plexus that drove all the air from his lungs and left him gasping like a fish on dry land. 8 seconds had elapsed, 2 men down. Nolan had more sense than his friends. He turned to run. But Jason was faster, his hand shooting out to grab Nolan's hood and yank him backward. Nolan's feet went out from under him, and he hit the ground hard. Jason pinned him with a knee to his spine, maintaining control while his eyes swept the area for additional threats. None, just 3 idiots who'd picked the wrong target. "Don't move," Jason said, his voice absolutely calm, despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "Any of you move and I will break bones. Am I clear?" Gavin, still clutching his throat and trying to breathe, managed a nod. Adrian was too busy gasping to respond. Nolan whimpered something that might have been agreement. Jason pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed 911, never taking his eyes off the 3 men or his knee off Nolan's spine. "This is Jason Reeves, 442 Sunset Cliffs Boulevard. I need police and animal control. 3 suspects in custody for animal cruelty and assault. Suspects are restrained but conscious." The dispatcher started asking questions, but Jason cut her off. "I'm former military, special operations. The situation is controlled. Just send units now." He ended the call and moved to Connor, still maintaining visual contact with the 3 men. The old dog was breathing, shallow, pained, but breathing. Blood matted the fur on his shoulder where the rock had hit, and Jason could see swelling along his ribs where the kicks had landed. "I'm here, buddy," Jason said softly, his hand gentle on Connor's head. "I'm so sorry. I should never have left you alone." Connor's tail moved slightly, not a wag, just acknowledgement that Jason was there. The dog's eyes were clouded with pain, but also with something else, trust. Even hurt, even suffering, Connor trusted that Jason would make it right. "You know what you've done?" Jason said, looking at the 3 men. His voice was still calm, but there was something underneath it that made Gavin's blood run cold. "That dog has more combat deployments than most soldiers see in a full career. He's located IEDs that saved dozens of lives. He's tracked insurgents through terrain you can't imagine. He's taken fire, been wounded in action, and earned more commendations than any of you will ever deserve." "It's just a dog, man," Adrian started, and Jason's expression shut him up instantly. "Just a dog." Jason's voice dropped to something dangerous. "That just a dog is a decorated veteran who served his country with more courage and honor than you 3 will ever understand, and you tortured him for fun." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Jason could see other park visitors approaching cautiously, witnesses who'd seen at least part of what happened. Good. He wanted witnesses. "Here's what's going to happen," Jason said, addressing the three men. "Police are going to arrest you for animal cruelty, which is a felony in California. It's also a federal crime to harm a military working dog or veteran military working dog, which Connor is. That's additional federal charges. You're looking at serious prison time." "We didn't know," Nolan started. "Didn't know what? That hurting animals is wrong. That torturing a defenseless creature makes you pieces of shit." Jason's control was slipping slightly, the cold rage giving way to something hotter. You didn't need to know he was military. You just needed to not be sadistic cowards. Two police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, followed by an animal control vehicle. Officers emerged, hands near their weapons, until they assessed the scene and realized the man standing was the one in control. Officer Claire Martinez had been with San Diego PD for 9 years, and she'd seen plenty of strange scenes. But this one was new. 3 men on the ground in various states of distress, one very calm man standing over them and an injured dog lying nearby. "I'm Officer Martinez," she said, approaching carefully. "Someone want to tell me what happened here?" "Jason Reeves, former Navy SEAL," Jason said, his military bearing evident even in civilian clothes. "These 3 men attacked my dog, a retired military working dog. I intervened to stop the assault and restrained them until you arrived." Claire looked at the 3 men, then at the dog, then at Jason. "Your dog is injured?" "Yes. Kicked multiple times, hit with rocks. He's 11 years old, retired from active service due to combat injuries. He needs immediate veterinary care." The animal control officer, a woman named Audrey Chen, was already kneeling beside Connor with a first aid kit. "Hey there, beautiful boy," she said softly, running experienced hands over his body. "We're going to take good care of you." Claire turned her attention to the 3 men, who were now sitting up but not trying to flee. Gavin's throat was already showing bruises. Adrian was still struggling to breathe normally. Nolan looked like he might cry. "Which one of you wants to tell me your side?" Claire asked. "We were just messing around," Gavin said, his voice hoarse. "The dog was alone and we thought—" "You thought what?" Claire interrupted. "That it would be fun to torture an animal?" "It's not like we were trying to kill it," Adrian said. "We were just what? Just committing felony animal cruelty?" Claire pulled out her notepad. "I've got witnesses who saw you throwing rocks and kicking a defenseless animal. That's Penal Code 597, felony animal cruelty. Plus, if that's a military dog like this gentleman says, there are federal statutes involved." Nolan's face went pale. "Federal charges?" "Preventing Harm to Service Dogs Act," Jason said, his voice flat. "Makes it a federal crime to harm military working dogs or retired military working dogs. Connor's military service is documented. His retirement papers are at home. You picked the wrong dog." Claire was already calling for backup and additional units. This wasn't going to be a simple citation and release situation. This was arrests, evidence collection, witness statements, the full procedure. More officers arrived, including a sergeant who took one look at the scene and immediately started coordinating. Witness statements were taken from the park visitors who'd seen the attack. Photos were taken of Connor's injuries. The 3 men were handcuffed and placed in separate vehicles. Audrey finished her preliminary examination of Connor. "He needs X-rays to rule out broken ribs or internal injuries. I'm transporting him to Emergency Pet Hospital on Mira Mesa Boulevard. You can follow us." "I'm riding with him," Jason said in a tone that didn't invite argument. Audrey nodded, recognizing a bond that went beyond pet ownership. "Let me get the stretcher." As they carefully loaded Connor into the animal control vehicle, Claire approached Jason with her notepad. "I need your statement. Walk me through exactly what happened." Jason did, his recollection precise and detailed, the training that made SEALs reliable witnesses. Times, distances, specific actions, exact sequences. Claire took notes, recognizing immediately that this was someone who'd given official statements before, someone who understood how evidence worked. "The three suspects," Claire said when he finished, "you restrained them with considerable force. Any concerns about excessive force claims?" "I used appropriate force to stop an ongoing assault and detain 3 suspects until law enforcement arrived," Jason said calmly. "I'm trained in non-lethal restraint techniques. None of them have injuries that require hospitalization, and there are multiple witnesses who can confirm they were actively attacking my dog when I intervened." Claire nodded. "I'm not worried about it, just covering bases." She paused, looking at Connor being settled in the vehicle. "That dog really is a veteran. 6 deployments: Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria. Explosive detection and patrol work. He found an IED in Kandahar that would have destroyed our convoy. 17 men, including me. Another time in Ramadi he alerted to an ambush before we walked into it. Saved lives both times, and those are just 2 examples. And they just kicked him? For fun?" "People like that don't think," Jason said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "They see something vulnerable, and their first instinct is to hurt it. It's not about the dog being military or civilian or anything else. It's about them being cowards who feel powerful by causing pain." Claire closed her notepad. "Those 3 have priors. Gavin Sawyer's on parole for armed robbery. Adrian Ruiz has multiple assault charges. Nolan Ford's got drug possession and theft convictions. This incident is going to violate Sawyer's parole automatically. Send him back to prison. The other 2 are looking at serious time too." "Good," Jason said without sympathy. "Maybe they'll learn something." "Maybe," Claire said, though her tone suggested she didn't believe it. "I'll need you to come down to the station tomorrow for a formal statement, and we'll need Connor's military service records for the federal charges." "I'll bring everything," Jason promised. Audrey called from the vehicle. "We're ready to transport. You coming?" Jason climbed into the back, settling beside Connor's stretcher. The old dog's eyes opened, finding Jason's face, and his tail moved slightly. That same acknowledgement, that same trust. "I've got you, buddy," Jason whispered, his hand gentle on Connor's head. "Just like you had me all those times. We take care of each other, remember? That's the deal." The emergency veterinary hospital was efficient and professional. Connor was taken immediately for X-rays and examination, while Jason sat in the waiting room, his hands still trembling slightly from adrenaline crash. He called Savannah, explained what happened, and she promised to meet him at the hospital. "Doctor." Natalie Hughes emerged after 45 minutes with better news than Jason had feared. 3 cracked ribs, significant bruising, possible mild concussion, but no internal bleeding or organ damage. "He's tough for his age." "He's tough for any age," Jason said. "What's the treatment?" "Pain management, rest, monitoring for the next 48 hours to ensure there are no complications. Given his age and previous injuries, I'd like to keep him overnight for observation." "You can visit, but he needs to stay calm and quiet." Jason nodded, relief flooding through him. "Can I see him now?" Connor was in a recovery kennel, lying on soft bedding with an IV line providing fluids and pain medication. His tail thumped weakly when Jason appeared, and the expression on his greyed muzzle was one Jason had seen before. After firefights, after close calls, after missions that had pushed them both to their limits. It said, "We made it through another one." "Hey, brother," Jason said softly, kneeling beside the kennel. "You scared me today." Connor's tail thumped again, and Jason reached through the kennel door to rest his hand on the dog's head. For several minutes, they stayed like that. 2 veterans who'd been through hell together, now dealing with a different kind of trauma in a different kind of battlefield. Savannah arrived and found them like that, her boyfriend and the dog she'd learned to love through his stories. "Oh my God," she said, seeing Connor's injuries. "Is he going to be okay?" "He'll recover," Jason said. "He's survived worse." Those men who did this are going to prison, Jason said with finality. Federal charges, parole violations, felony animal cruelty. They won't see the outside of a cell for years. Over the next few days, the case gained media attention. A retired Navy SEAL defending his combat veteran dog from animal abusers was the kind of story that resonated with both military communities and animal lovers. The local news ran segments. Veterans organizations rallied behind Jason and Connor. A GoFundMe for Connor's medical bills raised 10 times what was needed within 48 hours. But more importantly, it sparked conversations about retired military working dogs, about the services they provided and the care they deserved. About the bonds between handlers and their partners, bonds forged in combat and sustained through peace. Gavin Sawyer's parole was revoked, sending him back to finish his original sentence, plus additional time for the new charges. Adrian Ruiz and Nolan Ford both took plea deals that involved significant prison time and mandatory psychological counseling. They'd serve at least 3 years each, possibly more. At Connor's follow-up appointment 2 weeks later, Dr. Hughes pronounced his recovery remarkable. His ribs are healing well. The bruising is resolving. Honestly, for an 11-year-old dog with his medical history, he's doing incredibly well. He's a fighter, Jason said, watching Connor walk slowly around the examination room, his tail wagging despite the lingering stiffness. Always has been. I wanted to mention something, Dr. Hughes said. We've been getting calls from veterans groups and military working dog organizations. They want to honor Connor, awards, recognition events, that kind of thing. Are you open to that? Jason looked at Connor, who'd settled at his feet with a contented sigh. What do you think, buddy? Want to be famous? Connor's tail thumped against the floor, which Jason took as consent. 3 months later, at a ceremony hosted by the San Diego Veterans of Foreign Wars Post, Connor received multiple commendations: the Military Working Dog Service Medal, recognition from the Navy SEAL Foundation, and a lifetime of free veterinary care donated by a coalition of local animal hospitals. Jason stood beside Connor on stage, both of them uncomfortable with the attention but understanding its importance, and gave a brief speech that he'd been asked to prepare. Connor and I deployed together 6 times, Jason said, looking out at the audience of veterans, active military and community members. In those deployments, we faced situations most people can't imagine. IEDs that could kill dozens, ambushes in urban terrain, hostage situations where seconds mattered, and through all of it, Connor never hesitated, never failed, never let me down. The bond between a handler and a military working dog isn't like pet ownership, it's partnership. It's brotherhood. When I went into a building, Connor went first. When we took fire, Connor was beside me. When I was wounded in Kandahar, Connor stayed with me until medevac arrived, protecting me even though he'd been injured too. What happened in that park 3 months ago, when cowards attacked him because they could, because he was vulnerable? That made me angrier than any combat situation I've experienced. Because Connor earned his peace. He earned his retirement. He earned the right to lie in the sun without fear. And the fact that those men saw an old dog and thought easy target tells you everything about who they are. They didn't see a veteran. They didn't see a hero. They didn't see a living being that deserved respect. They saw weakness, and they exploited it. But here's what they learned. Connor isn't alone. Every military working dog has handlers who love them, communities that support them, and a whole network of people who will stand up for them. Because we don't forget, we don't abandon, we don't leave anyone behind, not our human brothers and sisters, and not our 4-legged ones either. Connor saved my life more than once. The least I can do is ensure his remaining years are peaceful, comfortable, and filled with the love he's earned. And anyone who threatens that will discover what I discovered years ago in training. Never underestimate the fight in someone protecting what they love. The applause was sustained, and genuine. Connor, lying at Jason's feet, seemed unbothered by the noise, his eyes half closed in contentment. After the ceremony, dozens of people approached to meet Connor, to shake Jason's hand, to share their own stories of military working dogs they'd known or loved, veterans who'd served with K9 units, families who'd adopted retired military dogs, children who wanted to pet the hero dog. Connor tolerated it all with the patience of a dog who'd spent years being handled by strangers in high-stress environments. But Jason noticed the moments when Connor would lean slightly against his leg, seeking reassurance or simply connection. "You did good today, buddy," Jason said later, as they drove home in the evening light. Connor lay in the back seat, his head resting on a pillow, watching the familiar streets pass by. At home, Savannah had prepared Connor's favorite dinner, ground beef mixed with rice and vegetables, supplemented with the joint medications and supplements that kept him comfortable. Connor ate slowly but appreciatively, then settled on his orthopedic bed in the living room. Jason sat on the floor beside him, scratching behind Connor's ears, in the spot that had always made the dog's leg kick involuntarily. "You know what I realized?" Jason said softly. "In all our deployments, all the dangerous situations we faced, I was always worried about keeping you safe, making sure you came home, and now in retirement, I'm still doing it, still protecting you. I guess some things never change." Connor's tail wagged slowly, his eyes fixed on Jason's face with that expression of complete trust and affection that only dogs can truly master. "Those guys in the park learned what a lot of enemies learned the hard way," Jason continued. "You don't mess with my brother, you don't hurt my family, because I will find you, I will stop you, and I will make sure you face consequences. That's what we do for each other. That's what loyalty means." Savannah appeared in the doorway, watching the scene with a soft expression. "You two are something special, you know that?" "We're just a couple of old veterans," Jason said, smiling, "trying to enjoy our retirement." "And doing a pretty good job of it," Savannah said, "except for the part where you had to tackle 3 criminals." "That was just keeping sharp," Jason joked. "SEALs never really retire." But there was truth in it. The training, the mindset, the absolute commitment to protecting what mattered, those things didn't disappear just because you took off the uniform. They were part of who you became, forged in the crucible of service and tested in moments of crisis. Connor had taught Jason that loyalty wasn't about convenience or reciprocity. It was about showing up every time without question or hesitation. It was about standing between threats and the ones you loved, even when standing meant taking hits meant for them. It was about trusting that when you fell, someone would be there to help you up. They'd practiced that loyalty in war zones across 3 continents. They'd proven it in firefights and on patrol routes and during missions that pushed them both to their limits. And they demonstrated it again in a park in San Diego, when an old dog needed protection and his brother answered the call without thought for his own safety. As the evening settled into night and Connor's breathing deepened into sleep, Jason thought about the years ahead. However many they had, 2 years, 5 years, hopefully more, he'd make sure Connor knew peace, comfort, and the security of being unconditionally loved. Because that's what brothers did. That's what warriors did for the ones who'd fought beside them. That's what loyalty looked like when tested not by combat, but by the simple, fundamental requirement to protect the vulnerable from those who would cause harm. Connor had spent 9 years protecting Jason. Now it was Jason's turn to return the favor for however long Connor had left. And anyone who thought retirement made them easy targets would learn the same lesson those 3 thugs had learned. Some bonds are forged in fire and steel. They don't weaken with age or time. They only grow stronger, tempered by shared experience and sustained by a loyalty that knows no limits, asks no questions, and accepts no compromise. Connor had saved Jason's life more than once, and Jason would spend the rest of Connor's life making sure that debt was honored with the respect, protection, and love that every warrior, human or canine, earned through service and sacrifice. That was the promise. That was the bond. That was the brotherhood that transcended species and outlasted war. And nothing, not age, not injury, not cruel men in parks, would ever break it.